Are old people the problem in the world? That's a case somebody was making in a video I was watching, and that sounds really awful, but it is kind of true. Now, that's not to say that old people are not folks we should admire. It's just, if you think about it, every single one of us is going to become an old person if we're privileged enough to be on this earth that long. And there's a lot of people who are narcissistic, who are hateful, self-absorbed, obsessed with material things, obsessed with their own personal pursuit of immortality and vain glory. What happens when old people who never really became wise become powerful and afraid of their own mortality? And they're driven by narcissism and ego and selfishness and all of those kinds of things. They use their leverage to try to marginalize other people. It's just like the guy in Star Wars who Palpatine said became terrified of losing his power. That was the only thing he was afraid of. And so he became fixated on making sure he never lost his power. And that was sort of like the birth of the dark side of the Force. When you know that you're mortal, you know that you have a limited amount of time to be on this earth, but you don't want to really admit it. You don't really want to acknowledge that it's not about you. You want to live forever. You've got this God complex. I thought about this when I read about people who paid to have their bodies cryogenically frozen so that they could be theoretically brought back to life at a future point when cryotechnology develops enough to be able to make it possible to resurrect the dead, basically. What kind of a person does that? Well, somebody who's not doing well with their health, someone who's old, someone who knows their time is over, but they're greedy. They don't want to say, I had my blessings, I had my life, and I want others to have a good life now. That's really how you achieve immortality, right? You say, it's not about me, it's about the young people who are going to be carrying on the torch when I'm gone. It's about leaving something for them. It's about planting trees under whose shade I will never rest. But see, a lot of people have this attitude, you know what, if the tree doesn't grow big enough for me, then I'm going to rip it out and burn it down. Because it's all about me. It's not about somebody else. Well, it's one thing when you're young and you don't really have resources and you feel like the world is stacked against you and you have that attitude of belligerence. But what happens when you're old and you have a lifetime of wealth and influence and leverage you've gained and all of that stuff, but you still have that attitude that's all about you? Then we wonder, why is the world sometimes messed up? Like, why is there problems? Well, some of those problems are because there's old, powerful people who don't care about leaving the world better than they found it as much as they care about avoiding the reality of their own mortality. It's people who are more interested in growing their wealth than they are in making the world a better place. It's old politicians who are in their 80s and they're defining policy for all of the people who are half their age. That's not to say that we shouldn't honor age, because I believe we should. Nor is this to say that we shouldn't be invested in prolonging human life and finding ways for people to live happy, successful, and prosperous lives in old age. It's not really about age. It's about what kind of a person you are. Are you the kind of a person that celebrates the success of others, or are you a person who celebrates only your own success for its own sake? Do you want to invest in the success of others for their own benefit, or do you want to only invest in the success of others if it is an extension of your own personal success? There's the brash, belligerent, rebellious nature of youth, and then there's also the inflexible, brittle nature of old age. We all need to make adjustments to our personality, to our methods, to our way of looking at the world, to understand that we need to be able to follow the spirit of the law, but not the letter. We need to be able to care about ourselves, but not be extremely self-absorbed. We need to respect tradition, while also being capable of embracing change. We need to be moderate in our lives, because the truth is, if you can't be moderate in your life when you're young or when you're middle-aged, it's not going to get better when you grow old. You're going to be more set in your ways, more inflexible, more belligerent. But it doesn't have to be that way either. It's possible to understand fundamentally that it's not about you. People with different perspectives have just as much to offer. No matter how much you think that you know the answers, you're probably wrong to some degree. And no matter how much people doubt you, you're probably right to a point. And there's always room and value in life for positivity, for seeing the world as a place where the glass is half full, not half empty, for believing that we live in a friendly universe. There was a video I was watching on YouTube about a 100-year-old World War II pilot who was flying one last sortie in the original airplane that he flew in as a pilot in World War II. And that is pretty dang impressive. In the comments, people said, well, that's the greatest generation. And people aren't like that anymore. And I said something to the effect of, there's greatness in every generation, and he's a great man. But the reality is, in World War II, a lot of young men were thrust into something that was bigger than any of them. They were normal kids, and they were not better or worse than the current generation today, because there's good in every generation. Now, I wasn't saying that because I feel threatened. I wasn't saying that because I'm trying to detract from that old guy who obviously lived a pretty epic life. I'm saying that because there's this notion that the good old days were amazing. But now, people aren't what they used to be. Civilization is going to fall apart because today's youth just don't have what it takes, like the greatest generation did. That's not true, though. There's amazing stories of young people doing great things, innovating, learning, leading, creating. And if we have that attitude that the last generation was great and the current generation is trash, we're disrespecting both generations, because what we need as individuals who are living today is to have faith that those who live tomorrow are going to rise higher than we do. We should celebrate their success. We should root for them. We should believe in them. Somebody replied to my comment with something along the lines of, "Shut up." I assume whoever wrote that comment telling me to shut up was part of something a little bit closer to that greatest generation group. Those people who see anyone who criticizes older people and anyone who advocates for the younger ones as being somehow out of touch. There's a lot of problems that older people have made for younger people. We look at things like home prices. Does it occur to you, older people don't care if houses are affordable for people who don't have them? They don't care. They just want the equity in their home to go up, right? If everyone else is screwed while they are doing well, do they mind? As far as I can tell, no. They just have that attitude, well, it sucks to be you. Well, it's true. Money doesn't buy what it used to buy. In some ways, our lives are better off than ever before. And in some ways, they're not. There was a time when it was probably a lot more affordable for a couple to buy a house and live affordably. And today, for a lot of folks, in a lot of places, that's a vanishing dream. And if we have this culture of saying, well, you know, when I was young, I just pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I did what I needed to do and I wound up being just fine. So why don't you just suck it up? Are we really doing good for future generations? Probably not. The truth of the matter is we all owe other people for the success that we have in our lives too. There's that notion that people have that they just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they made their life what it is. I don't think so. Because the more I live, the more I realize the great things that happen in my life feel more like the hand of Providence than purely my doing. You have a conversation with somebody and it bears fruit and leads you to a place you didn't expect to be. Happy coincidences happen, which help you to find a path that is beneficial to you. That attitude that the future belongs to people who take it by force omits the fact that we all owe the blessings in our life to some sort of grace that was given to us along the way. We should shift from egotism to gratitude. We should seek to invest in tides that lift all boats, not just our own personal ship. And whenever we start to feel like we want to be rigid, we want to be set in our ways, we want to pick a hill and die on it, just remember, whenever you're so sure that you're right, how you felt when you were very young, looking at other people who were older than you, who were set in their ways, inflexible. Those old people who thought the cell phones were some newfangled thing and couldn't figure them out. The people who couldn't figure out how to use a computer, you know, like all of those people that never adapted when the world changed. Don't be one of those people. Be a person who sees good in the world, who sees good in others, who believes that even if our current generation has plenty of people who aren't quite maybe doing what they should be doing, or maybe they're not super smart or whatever, there's also people who have a lot of integrity and a lot of brilliance too. For every disenchanting thing out there, there's also something that's beautiful and amazing. So it's a matter of what do you want to choose to watch. You know, like on YouTube, I started unsubscribing to things and hitting not interested for a lot of videos. If it's something that's not a positive topic, it's something that's negative, it's something that's talking about people in a seemingly harmful way, it's something that's inflammatory, you know, I try to, you know, cut those things out and instead watch something that feels like it's inspiring, something that's not going to be contributing to that perception that the world is this broken, miserable place. And when you stop consuming that kind of content, when you stop diving into an echo chamber and then surrounding yourself with more people who share the same echo chamber, well, then you start to have a little bit more of an optimistic perspective on life, too. I was thinking about the stark contrast between living in Montana and moving to Northwest Arkansas, which is a pretty progressive place. Compare the two. Montana had that reputation of places that don't change, people that don't change. I remember a guy came into the Walmart store where I worked and asked me where the VHS tapes were. And this was probably like 2020, you know, somewhere around there when this happened. So VHS tapes haven't been in a store for a real long time, but he came out of his ranch or the hills or wherever it was he came from, and for some reason, a quarter of the way through the 21st century, he's still looking for VHS tapes. Sometimes we need to stop bragging about how inflexible we are, and instead understand that age does not equal wisdom. And as much as we do need to leave behind the indiscretion of youth, we also need to try to keep the heart of a child, which is filled with wonder, more inclined to love than to hate, more inclined to be curious than to be unwilling to embrace new things. When we believe in others, That's when we're at our best. And a lot of people, when they get older, they get set in their ways, and all they think of is themselves. And there's nothing more pitiful and disappointing than the company of someone who is well past their prime, who is close to the end of their life, and they still don't know how to think about anything other than themselves. I'm reminded of my old friend, Mr. Richard Snelson, who's passed away now, but in his 80s, we'd spend so many hours just sitting around his office or his gazebo or by his garden or something, and he always respected me, and he believed in me, and we had so many great conversations, which I will always cherish. And he always would say, life has loveliness to sell, buy it and never count the cost, which is a saying that I have since made my own. But what stands out the most about him is, despite the fact that he was about 3 times as old as me, it always felt like we were just friends hanging out. It never felt like he was better than me. Never felt like he thought of himself as at a higher level than me. Sure, he had a lot of life experience I didn't have, and I enjoyed hearing his stories. But he had that humility that made me feel like there was nothing about him that demanded tribute or expected to be looked up to or anything. He just was a person whose company I enjoyed, and he enjoyed my company, and we were friends, drinking coffee and having breakfast at a random diner, all that kind of stuff, going to Wendy's. That's kind of the sort of person you should try to be. Not a person who's full of yourself, but a person who has a richer life because you view the success of others as an extension of your success, and you view it as an honor and a privilege to share in the journey of those who will continue their adventure after yours is over. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks so much.